What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's transfer tips for Game Week 18. So I'm going to go through some of the popular players being moved in and out of people's squads, including Bukayo Saka, and talk about whether they are good moves or not. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And just to talk about where I am for those watching on YouTube, I am away visiting family for Christmas, so I'm in a slightly different setup. The sound's probably not quite as good as it usually is, but hopefully it's decent enough that you will still watch the videos over the next few days. So I'm planning on having a bit of content out before the Game Week 18 deadline, and hopefully I'll still be able to stream on Boxing Day as well, and then probably back to normal for game weeks after that. So thank you very much for bearing with me, and that's it. Let's get into it. So let's start with Bukayo Saka, who went off quite early in the first half against Crystal Palace in Game Week 17. There's not yet official confirmation about exactly how long he might be out for, but the reports going around are that it's a hamstring problem. And the issue with that is in FPL, you've got 3 matches for Arsenal in the next 12 days. It's very likely that he's going to miss all of them, and then he could potentially be out longer as well, depending on the severity of the injury. So unless we get news ahead of the deadline that he's going to be okay, I think for anyone that owns Saka, you're probably going to be looking at selling him. That's too much money to have on your bench for kind of 3 weeks plus. And I think for a lot of people, as an overall kind of thought on Saka, is I'd be looking to downgrade him in order to be able to fund moves to your defence like Trent Alexander-Arnold, or your forward line like Isak if you haven't already got him. And we're going to talk about both of those players later on. So I would be looking to sell. For anyone that is worried about the money they have tied up in Saka, I wouldn't panic too much. He's already gone down 0.1 since the Crystal Palace game. The longer he's out, the more that price will drop. And obviously points are important as well. If you've got over 10 million invested in a player and they're not going to play for 3+ weeks, he's probably got to go. In terms of replacements, unless you're going to Palmer or Salah because you don't own those players yet, then you're looking at a midfielder that's a lot cheaper. And by the way, if you don't have Palmer or Salah, just get those 2 players. That's pretty straightforward. For players that are a bit cheaper, in and around the 8 to 9 million price point, you could look at Son as almost a direct replacement. Huge differential. Next 3 fixtures, not bad. Forest away, Wolves at home, Newcastle at home. Those 2 home games in particular are pretty decent. My only slight concern with Son is Arsenal away in 21 and Everton away in 22 and not great. I also think down the line, people won't want a midfielder unless it's Saka at that kind of price point. They'd rather have more money spread around their squad. And also, I still have slight reservations about Son's minutes. Maybe I'm overplaying that a little bit, but we have seen him brought off early in a few games. The Southampton game was obviously clearly won at the time, and they just chose that point to rest him. But overall, I just worry that with the fixture congestion, he might be subbed a bit earlier than we're necessarily used to. Like even against Liverpool yesterday, like he came off in the 81st minute. Now, maybe I just thought the game was lost, or he wanted to bring someone else on to try and get the win, Werner, etc. But usually you would have expected Son to play the full 90 minutes, and it just didn't happen. And don't get me wrong, 81 is not terrible, but it's just something about Son where I just don't want to pay that price of 9.8 million for him at the moment. Bruno Fernandes, I'm not going to go through all the memes and stuff from my channel and Bruno Fernandes this season, but I think this might be one of the first times in 18 game weeks I've said this. I think he's a pretty good transfer in. He's been fairly consistent over the last kind of 7-8 game weeks. Yes, he blanked against Bournemouth yesterday, but the stats were pretty good. 0.86 expected goal involvement. He was very unlucky, at least from watching the highlights, to not come away with a return. And importantly, the fixtures are pretty decent. Liverpool away in 20 is tough, but you've got Wolves away this week, Newcastle at home in 19, Southampton at home in 21, Brighton at home in 22. So 3 home games next 5, and the away one is against Wolves. The guy's absolutely nailed on, not necessarily nailed to play number 10, but that's where he's getting most of his minutes. And he is a threat, and that would give you money to go to Trent, to Isak, wherever you want to go. So I actually quite like the Fernandes transfer in, and I've not said that very often this season. With Saka out, the knock-on effect is obviously that someone else is on penalties for Arsenal. And from what we've seen in the past, that will be Odegaard. Although Arsenal are not against giving penalties to other players. So it could be that Havertz, if he's on the pitch, takes a penalty instead. But I think we can pretty much assume that Odegaard's going to be first choice with no Saka. Maybe take a few more set pieces as well. And you've got the Ipswich game right in front of you, and then Brentford away, Brighton away, Spurs at home, Villa at home are pretty good fixtures. Now, in game weeks gone past, if anyone's asked me about Odegaard, I've basically said he's like Bruno Fernandes without penalties, but now he's got penalties. So I actually quite like him. I just think that when Saka comes back, that makes Odegaard a little bit worse. And I think as a long-term pick, if that's how you're thinking, I prefer Bruno Fernandes, but there is not much in it now. And the good thing about Arsenal is they don't have to play against Liverpool. But also, they've lost Saka, so that will weaken them a little bit. So I think it's quite close. If I was picking, I'd probably go Bruno, but maybe there is a little bit of bias there. You could look at Phil Foden at Man City as well. This would be a little bit of a leap of faith. We know how good he and City can be, but we haven't seen it for a little while, although Foden did score against Aston Villa. This next 5 set of fixtures is great, and I would not be surprised if we see a bit of a turnaround from Man City. Everton at home, Leicester away, West Ham at home, Brentford away, Ipswich away. I quite like the Foden move, maybe primarily because I'm not going to do it. But with Saka out, it does open the door to doing something a little bit different. If we think about the high-owned players right now in engaged managers' teams, you've got like Isak, probably an Arsenal defender, maybe Trent soon, Palmer, Salah, of course. That's about it. Saka was one of those players. Now he's gone. People are going to go in different directions. If you want to take a punt on Foden, I do not hate it, but you cannot guarantee his minutes. There may be games where he gets subbed early or gets benched. It's possible. But in terms of a 5-game week run, it's about the best on paper of these players that I'm going to talk about right now. So don't mind that as a punt. Jota, for me, the minutes are too risky. I know why people are looking at him because it's Leicester at home. He's back. He's better than Muñoz. He'll be first choice number 9, all that stuff. But I think that argument goes out the window when we've seen Gakpo and Díaz play as the left wing and number 9 so often. And I just think even if Jota plays against Leicester, he's only been off the bench twice. He's only been off the bench in the last 2 Premier League games. Even if he starts that Leicester game, how many minutes is he going to get? And then will he even start against West Ham? Will he even start against Man United? I don't think it's worth the risk personally. And then if you go down a little bit in price from kind of 8 million you've got in Burma as well, I may hold in Burma in my own team, but I definitely wouldn't buy him right now. Brighton away, Arsenal at home next 2 is not great. Also have to play City and Liverpool in 21-22. You could look at Anthony Gordon instead from Newcastle, but for me I think it's probably Bruno Fernandes and Odegaard as the top options, even though that's quite boring. So before you completely switch off for Christmas, don't forget to join the Let's Talk FPL Pick'em League over on Sleeper. There's another prize on offer for Game Week 18, which is a £50 Amazon voucher, completely free to play, and you can download the app using the link in the description below or scanning the QR code on screen, and you've just got to predict the results of all the matches in the Premier League for Game Week 18. So I'm actually recording this a little bit in advance, so I'm making my predictions for Game Week 18 before I've seen any of the matches for Game Week 17, but it shouldn't have too much of an effect. So I think from Game Week 18, we're going to see a bit of a resurgence for Man City. So I'm going to go for them to beat Everton. Bournemouth Crystal Palace is quite tough to call, but I'm going to go for a home win. Chelsea Fulham, again, another tough game for Chelsea. Even though they're at home, Fulham have played really well this season. So I'm actually going to go for a draw. Newcastle Villa, again, I'm going to go for a Newcastle win, fairly strong at home. Forest Spurs, again, there's a lot of hard games to call this week, I think. Spurs attack is great. Defensively, not brilliant whatsoever. I think Romero and Van der Ven will likely still be out. I'm actually going to go for a Forest home win. I think Spurs will score, but I think Forest have got 2 or 3 goals in them. Southampton, West Ham, by the time we get to that match, Southampton might have a new manager. I'm going to go for a Southampton home win there. Not quite sure about that one, though. I can always change my predictions later on. Wolves, Man United, I've got to back Man United. Liverpool, Leicester, it's definitely Liverpool, right? Everyone's going to be captaining Mo Salah this week. Brighton, Brentford again. Brentford, great at scoring goals, not so great at keeping them out of their own net. So I'm going to go for a Brighton home win. Then it's got to be Arsenal against Ipswich. That's literally all you have to do. So whoever gets the most amount of correct predictions in my mini league for Game Week 18 will win that £50 Amazon voucher. If there's more than one of you with the same amount of top predictions, then I'll do a random draw either on the Game Week 19 or 20 deadline stream. And that is it. Super simple to play, completely free to play as well. Use that link in the description below or scan that QR code on screen to get your predictions submitted. So let's move on to Crystal Palace and talk about Ismail Sarr next. Still only 5.7 million. Got another goal at the weekend, this time against against Arsenal. That's now 3 goals, 1 assist in the last 2 game weeks. And he's starting to look like a bit of a bargain at that price point under 6 million, especially with the fixtures they've got coming up. So it's Bournemouth away in 18, which is not easy. Bournemouth are a very good team. But in 19 and 21, they've got Southampton at home and Leicester away. And a game in the middle of that is Chelsea at home. So again, not an easy one. But when you're sandwiched between Southampton and Leicester, you're probably not going to worry about that all that much. So at 5.7 million, it's very hard to sit here and argue against him, even to the point where the underlying numbers are also looking really good. It doesn't look like this is just going to be a flash in the pan. So far this season, he's put up 0.35 non-penalty expected goals per 90 and 0.23 expected assists. And if you look at his actual goals, it's 0.36 per 90. So very close to his expected goals. It's not like he's massively overperforming over the season or anything like that. In total, it's now 10 starts, 4 goals, 3 assists. I can't really find anything bad to say about him as an option. I mean, at that price point and below, there's other players you could look at. I really like Semenyo at 5.6 million. His underlying numbers are great. He's nailed on. His minutes look great. He got 88 minutes against Man United despite coming off with a tight hamstring the game before. It just shows how much Bournemouth rely on him. So he's definitely an option as well. Ahmad, Enzo, etc. I still think are nice as 8th attackers. But when I look at the numbers of Sarr and Semenyo, I think for their prices, they are well worth it. And when you look at the minutes that he's had recently, it's just great, right? Back-to-back 90 minutes, Arsenal-Brighton, 76 against City, 89 against Ipswich, 90 against Newcastle, 89 against Villa. The list goes on. The minutes are there, the numbers are there. If I could be picky and try and find something negative just to play devil's advocate, once Eze is fit, you've got him, Sarr, Kamada just played 60 minutes against Arsenal as well, Mateta and Nketiah is fit too. There is potential that Sarr's minutes longer term might go down. And that is maybe a slight negative against him from an FPL point of view. But when I look at the fixtures coming up, the numbers he's putting out, the fact that Eze has just missed a game and who knows when he'll be back, probably for Bournemouth, but not a guarantee. And he's not got the greatest track record of staying fit. It's really hard to argue against Sarr. And if you want to bring him in now or 19 against Southampton at home, that looks pretty great. So let's stick to Crystal Palace and talk about Muñoz next in defence, who's now served his suspension for picking up 5 yellow cards, so he'll be back in the 11 against Bournemouth away in game week 18. I think the ideal window to buy Crystal Palace players probably is that Southampton fixture in game week 19, but Bournemouth away would not put me off completely if I need a new cheap defender this week. And at 4.7 million, he looks like another potential bargain. And the nice thing about him is, even if you've got to play him in a game like Bournemouth away, he's got the attacking numbers to back it up. I think if season's gone past in FPL, and a 4.7 million attacking right wing back is exactly what we'd be looking at. And the numbers are there as well, like 0.19 expected goals per 90 over the season. That's one of the best attacking defenders in FPL right now. Trent will have better numbers, of course, although that's primarily skewed to assists. Gabriel's numbers are good too, but Muñoz at 0.19 is one of the most threatening defenders when it comes to goal threat. So I really like him. I don't think there's really many other cheap defenders that I would prefer to buy this week. Like, Fulham defenders are popular, of course, but they play Chelsea this week. So the ideal time to get them would be game weeks 19 or 21. Probably not this week. And when I look at the list of the fixtures coming up, I know Everton have just kept another clean sheet, and I can't keep backing against them, but they're playing Man City away. So Man City will almost certainly score. Maybe Bournemouth, like Howson, because they're playing Crystal Palace at home. But I just think as a player to get in this week and then to hold for the medium to long term, it's got to be Muñoz. I just see that Southampton and Leicester fixture like with Sarr, and I can't look past that. And even if I had to play him against Chelsea at home in 20, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Then you've got West Ham away in 22, Brentford at home in 23. There's really no negatives to say about Muñoz. If you need a cheap defender, he is probably who I would get this week. So on the other end of the pricing scale, you've got Trent Alexander-Arnold at 7 million, the most expensive defender in the game. And some people would argue that he's not worth that price still. But I think with the funds freed up by selling Saka, people are going to find it a lot easier to get to players like Trent. And to be fair, he's started 14 times this season, came off the bench against Newcastle as well. And he's got 4 assists and 6 clean sheets. So that's 10 returns in 14 starts, plus that 1 appearance off the bench. So that's not bad. And for anyone that said he wasn't as attacking in this Liverpool team, I think now he's got those 4 assists, he's kind of proved that he can still be that attacking defender, and he's always had the underlying numbers to show there was potential there. And if you're going to buy Liverpool players, the time to do it is either in 23 for Ipswich at home just before that potential double in 24, or right now, because you've got Leicester at home, arguably the best fixture in FPL right now. They are not looking great under Ruud van Nistelrooy whatsoever. And after that, you've got West Ham away, Man United at home, Forest away, Brentford away. Not bad for a team that is so good defensively and for how attacking Trent can be. I think for the clean sheets to be really consistent, ideally we will get Konate back soon. But even with him out of the team, I still think Trent is great. So if you've got money to spare, you need to upgrade a defender, you don't want to go to like a Muñoz or someone like that, maybe you've already got him, I think Trent is well worth the money over Van Dijk. And it's not to say that Van Dijk is a bad option, because he's not, but the difference in price between him and Trent is just not big enough, in my opinion, to justify going for Van Dijk instead. As always, trying to play devil's advocate, maybe with Trent, there is a slight issue with minutes over the next couple of matches because of how quick the turnaround time is between 18 and 19. And there is a chance he could be benched against Leicester because Liverpool can win that game without him. But I would predict it's more likely that he starts and comes off early. And then as owners, we're hoping that's after the 60th minute, because they've just played on Sunday and the game against Leicester isn't until Thursday. So that's more than enough time to recover and play again. But the West Ham game is on the following Sunday. So they're Sunday, Thursday, Sunday. I think there's a pretty good chance Trent just starts both of those games and comes off early, maybe in both of them as well. I just think he's worth the risk. Once he's in your team, unless he gets injured, he's staying for quite a while. And I think he will prove to be value for money, even at 7 million. So sticking to Liverpool, let's talk about Luis Díaz next. Lots of transfers in for him this week, which isn't surprising considering he scored 2 goals against Spurs, only cost 7.4 million, and it's Leicester at home in game week 18. And I don't want to overplay how good that fixture is, but if I was betting on a team to score 5, 6, 7 goals this game week, it definitely would be Liverpool. That being said, I'm always going to struggle with players like Díaz because their minutes are not something you can rely upon. If you think he's going to regularly get 75 to 80 minutes over the next few game weeks, then I would definitely buy him, right? And I've said that all season. But if you're not sure, I'm not convinced whether he's worth a place in our midfields. Now, with that Saka spot kind of freed up, or probably freed up, you can play around a bit with who you bring in, but I would still want someone you can rely on quite regularly. And I think with Díaz, yes, he can play left wing. Yes, he can play through the middle as well. But even with Jota not at full fitness recently, he still hasn't started every game. So we look back over the last 5 game weeks. You got 28 minutes against Southampton in game week 12, 90 against City in game week 13, 23 against Newcastle in 14, and then 90 against Fulham in 16 and 86 yesterday against Spurs. So overall, when he plays, he does often play 80 to 90, but you've got those benchings in between. And I said this like weeks ago when people were talking about wildcard 6, right? If we go all the way back to there, Díaz looks great until he starts getting benched, and then it becomes a problem. And if he gets returns off the bench and in the games he starts, it's not an issue. But it's when he starts blanking and then he gets benched, it just becomes frustrating. And I just think if he gets limited minutes against Leicester or doesn't return as highly as you hope, and then you think there's benchings coming after that, it just won't look as good in your team. So as much as I would love to be tripled up on Liverpool for this fixture, I struggle to see 3 safe players outside of Salah and then 2 defensive players. I just think in Díaz, Gakpo, Jota, Nunez, you've got potential risk there. And yes, they've got that Ipswich game in 23 and then the double probably in 24. But if I'm going to buy someone like Díaz, I'd much rather do it closer to the time. I don't want to have to spend the next 4 or 5 game weeks getting frustrated with him being subbed off or being benched, but then knowing that I have to stick with him because the fixtures coming up are good. So I get why people are going there. And if the minutes are good, the returns will be good. I've got no doubts about that whatsoever. I just find it really frustrating when my players get benched, especially when they cost over 7 million. So it's not for me, but you probably already knew that before you started watching. I probably wouldn't talk someone out of doing it, but you've got to be the manager or the type of FPL manager that can cope with those benchings. So I'm not sure there's too much left to say about Alexander-Isak. The guy is incredible. He's got 5 attacking returns in the last 2 game weeks, so a goal and assist against Leicester, a hat-trick against Ipswich in the game week just gone. And I've been saying for weeks, he's the guy to buy if you've got the money. It's worth doing Watkins to Isak. It's worth buying Isak over Jackson, etc., etc. That's still the case. And I think the reason that I wanted to mention him in this video is because there's going to be people sat there without him, and some of those people are going to be thinking, have I missed the boat? Should I just look at someone else instead? And I think the answer is no. The fixtures coming up are still very good, to the point where you could probably argue the hardest fixture over the next 6 game weeks is Man United away. And no one with Isak is going to be worried about playing him against Man United away. So Villa at home in 18, that United game in 19, Spurs away in 20 is fine given the way they defend. Wolves at home in 21 looks decent. Bournemouth at home in 22, not bad. And then Southampton away in 23. There really is no reason to buy him if you've got the money. It might be that you've got a squad like mine where potentially, and I'll talk about this tomorrow, it doesn't quite make sense to buy him this week, but I've definitely got plans to pick him up over the next couple of weeks. So don't feel like you've missed the boat. And also his price is going to continue to rise. He's already gone up to 8.9 since that hat trick. I would not be surprised if he goes up again before the deadline. And then he'll probably be up again before that Man United game. I guess injuries are something people worry about with Isak, but he started quite a few times last year. If he's fit, he's going to be in that 11. And where possible, like against Ipswich, they'll sub him off early. So you haven't missed the boat. Buy him if you can. So I think there's potentially 2 Spurs midfielders that people might be looking at buying this week. You've got James Maddison at 7.6 million, currently on 97 points for the season, only 10 behind both Saka and Mbeumo. And then you've got Kulusevski, who's nice and cheap at 6.3 million. And as I mentioned earlier with Son, the next 3 fixtures are not bad. Nottingham Forest away, Wolves at home, Newcastle at home. The thing I missed off the graphic with Son is that after Arsenal away and Everton away, they then got Leicester at home in 23, which is pretty nice. And then after that Leicester game, it is Brentford away, Man United at home, Ipswich away. So overall, for the next 6 to 10 game weeks, the Spurs fixtures are not that bad. They're not perfect, but they're pretty good. So it's worth looking at. That being said, I'm not sure I would buy either of these players. So James Maddison, ridiculous scoring this season so far, but a bit like Díaz, you just cannot rely on his minutes. And you could obviously look at what's happened so far and say, well, it doesn't matter. I'll just play him every week. If he gets benched or subbed early, he's going to return for me anyway. But that only lasts so long. And if he does end up getting benched a bit more or subbed a bit earlier more often, that just becomes extremely frustrating. And when we look at his recent minutes, even in that Liverpool game, he didn't make it to 60. So he scored, but only played 57 minutes. 76 against Southampton. Now, obviously in that game, you've got to put the context that Spurs were running away with it, right? They were absolutely cruising. So an early sub is not the end of the world. But he only played 11 minutes against Chelsea the week before that. It was 77, 84 and 88 before that, which is decent. But then the 2 games in 10-11, like he was benched, played 6 and 8 minutes. So I think right now, Maddison's minutes look good, especially while Brennan Johnson is not getting in the team that often. But that could easily switch. All it takes is a couple of off performances for Maddison, and I wouldn't be surprised if Ange Postecoglou takes him back out of the team. So for 7.6 million, again, I just struggle to personally get behind a player like that I can't fully rely on. And then with Kulusevski, he is a player that's pretty much guaranteed to be in that 11, and his minutes are always great. But I don't like the underlying numbers. I've said this many times before. He's a really good player, but for FPL, I'm just not fully convinced. Now, at 6.3 million with guaranteed minutes, it's a little bit easier to justify the pick. And he has got 3 goals in 3 games, which is decent. And he's played 390 minutes in the last 4. And very, very rarely gets benched. So I like him from that perspective. But when I go back to the underlying numbers, 0.17 expected goals per 90. Muñoz, who we spoke about earlier, is higher than that. And then you could say, well, he's got the creativity, but it's 0.18 expected assists per 90. Like, he's a brilliant player. Spurs fans will not want him dropped whatsoever. He'll probably get a few returns over the next few game weeks. But I'm not convinced it's enough to warrant a spot in our midfield with those underlying numbers. Like, I would probably rather go and get Sarr as a bit of a risk longer term for minutes, or Semenyo, and just save a bit of money over Kulusevski. So it's not that he's a bad player, he's just not an FPL pick for me. But I could be wrong. I often am. So let me know what you think about these players I've spoken about in the comments below. Make sure to give the video a like if you haven't done so already, and hit that subscribe button. Rate 5 stars if you're listening on podcast, and check out Sleeper and join the Let's Talk FPL Premier League Pick'em League by using the link in the description below. I will catch you again tomorrow for team selection, so I'll see you then.